Hello and welcome back to Bookish Theories. In today's video, we'd like to talk about Tomorrow by Together's The Doom's Knight, focusing on a full breakdown of the story, the roles that the boys are playing in the game, and what we can expect in the future. Now, The Doom's Knight is the first animated installment of the Star Seekers, which is the title that from now on is gonna be the official name of Tomorrow by Together's storyline. According to what the boys said during the premiere, the Star Seekers will become an animated series with more episodes to be expected in the future, and even if for now we have no other information about it, I think it's safe to say that The Doom's Knight gave us quite a lot to unpack. Before we begin, however, I want to once again clarify which character is which, because I still see a lot of people getting confused and the story is already complicated as it is. Now in the video, the one with the blue hair is Yeonjun, and in the flashback his child version is the one with the sword. Subin is the one with the black hair and the yellow vest, who is also the child with the bow and the pointy ears. The blonde one is Beomgyu, who is also the child with the cape and the crown of leaves. The guy with the brown hair is Taeyeon, who is also the kid with the big hat and the staff, while Hyunin Kai is the one with the yellow hoodie as a teen and the green hoodie as a kid. If we compare the ending pose of Can't You See Me to the one that we see in the video, from left to right we have Taeyeon, Hyunin Kai, Yeonjun, Beomgyu and Subin. So now that we got that out of the way, let's jump right in and see what's going on. Now, since The Doom's Knight was used to announce both the Star Seekers as well as the release of the Magic Island book, I think it's fair to assume that the video is showing us a general introduction of the events that will unfold as time goes by. These are all events that were either foreshadowed or straight up shown in the content that we've seen up to this point, but The Doom's Knight also clarified a lot of things, starting from The Doom's Knight itself. At the beginning, for instance, the video opens with a vision that Subin has about the end of the world. In the vision, the boys are having a concert in a stadium when a black dragon appears in the sky, wreaking havoc on its surroundings, and while Subin stands alone among the ruins, he wonders if this is really the end. As he's taken over by desperation, the narration tells us that among the choices that he has, there is nothing that he can choose in order to avoid this event, and right off the bat, these visuals bring us right back to Eternally, where, in the Doom's Knight section of the video, Subin had the very same dream and the narration told us the very same thing. Back in that video, the boys questioned whether they had any other choices left for them, and as I mentioned in my last video, it really seems that they don't, because the Doom's Knight is a memory of a destined future that is meant to take place and cannot actually be changed. Now, as we'll see in a second, the whole point of the story seems to stop this event from happening and save the tomorrow that the boys will build together, and the reason why it's up to them to accomplish this task is because they might have actually been the ones to have caused it to begin with. You see, even if in the story the boys are idols like the actual members of Tomorrow by Together, one thing that it's important to understand is that their reality is a real-life game where the boys are the players and they don't even know it. This cosmic game is largely connected to the game that the boys were playing as children, and as I mentioned in some of my past videos, the rules of this game seem to have been inspired by Dungeons & Dragons, which is a tabletop RPG game where the players can go on campaigns and play as characters belonging to different classes. If we take a look at Subin's flashback, for instance, this is exactly what the children are playing. The kids are at the park, then the campaign begins, and they use their imagination to travel to a magic island where they become the characters that they're playing. This is a very similar concept to what we saw back in Up of a Star, for instance, because back then each of the children was wearing a mask that to an extent recalled the attributes that the characters have in the game. Like in that video, however, The Doom's Knight shows us that when the boys grow up, this game becomes real and the evil in the game becomes real as well, thus causing the dragon to come through and ending the world because of that. Now, since The Doom's Knight is a memory from the future, this paradox implies that this game actually resets and the apocalypse is something that already happened before and is meant to happen once again. Meaning that, to some extent, there must be some time loop involved where Subin actually goes back in time in order to stop The Doom's Knight from taking place. This idea is also reinforced by the video itself, because when we see the boys at the Star Festival, Subin eventually loses his friends because once again the Doom's Knight takes place, but this doesn't necessarily mean that the two events happen on the same day, but rather that one is the consequence of the other. You see, as I mentioned in my last video, the Star Festival is an event that we also saw back in Eternally and that in the story takes place on the same day of their debut. And judging by the outfits that they are wearing, this is also the same day where the boys awaken their powers on Magic Island. This is because both the Star Festival and the Magic Island are actually located in Tucson, which is a real location in Seoul that also has a small island in the middle of the river. Now, since in Magic Island they told us that this is their start line, my guess is that this is where everything began. When they were children, for instance, they played on Tucson Island and they transformed it into Magic Island with their imagination. As Snap of a Star showed us, however, growing up, the boys got separated, forgot about their games, and the star fell asleep. But before this took place, they actually made a promise to meet again in the very same place. Sure enough, a few years later, the boys met again because they became trainees in the very same company, but as Magic Island told us, even if they met again, at this point they couldn't figure it out just yet. The star is still asleep and the road is still dark, but on the day of their debut, that is, on the day where the 5 boys came together under one dream to build a better tomorrow, the boys do reunite in the same place because the Star Festival and the Magic Island are both in Tucson Park. Now, since in real life the day of their debut is literally the day where the boys' dreams essentially became true, I think that in the story their dreams became true as well, meaning that their powers got awakened and their childhood game became real. In doing so, however, the evil in the game became real as well, and this led the boys to make a pact with the cat and the Doom's Night to eventually take place because of that. As we see in the video, however, the boys are not alone in this journey because even if the star is still asleep, she actually appears in the shape of the Eternity Girl, who is also the ghost in the mirror that was first mentioned in Magic Island. This is an entity that heals Soobin from his monstrosity and helps him to go back because she knows countless futures, and my guess is that this creature is also a representation of Moa, who is none other than the boy star in real life. As we see in a great parallel with BTS's Make It Right, both Moa and ARMY are the helpers in the hero's journey. Because of your support, the heroes are able to slay the dragons and succeed in their quest despite of their struggles, but even if at the end we see Soobin sacrificing himself to save the others, I think that this is not the end of the story, but rather only one of the many possible futures that could actually take place. Now, since the events that unfold in the story are basically a real-life replica of the game that they were playing as children, this means that the boys already know what they have to do because they already did it before. Bear in mind, this is a story that they created, so everything that happens in it is something that came from their imagination. Since D&D is an RPG, they are the ones who decided which powers to have, that Huninkai was gonna get taken, and that the monster was gonna be a dragon. But just like they created their problems, they also created the solution to this problem, which is none other than the Song of the Star. As we see in Soobin's memory, the children's campaign has a very clear structure. The boys get their powers, they get attacked by a dragon that takes Huninkai, then they work together to free Huninkai, and with the help of the Star Song they eventually banish evil and have a happy ending. If you remember, back in Magic Island, the song told us that the Star Song was something that the boys must not forget, but as of right now, I really think that they did forget it, and this is a problem because the Star Song is what they need in order to stop the Doom's Night. Now, as we'll see in a second, Soobin seems to be able to access his memories through dream, so in theory this power should actually give him the ability to remember the Star Song and what it represents. But as we saw back in Eternally, up to this point Soobin seems to think that everything that he's seeing is just a familiar dream. In order to succeed, however, Soobin and the others must remember the Star Song because that is the solution that they created for their own problem. But as it turns out, accomplishing this task might actually be easier said than done, and this is because the Odd-Eyed Cat is involved. Now, judging by what we know up to this point, the Odd-Eyed Cat is an entity that is not part of the children's original game, but rather a cosmic creature that was able to sneak in the real world because of the door that the boys opened. Since this creature is also featured in BTS's story, this is not an entity that the boys created with their imagination, but rather something that already existed in the structure of the multiverse and that is able to interact with the characters despite not being part of the original game. And this is a problem because if the cat is not part of the original game, this means that its intervention has consequences that the boys cannot actually predict. In both stories, the cat makes a pact with the characters that seem convenient at the time, but always backfire in the worst possible way. And even if for now the powers that the characters are given change according to the story, one thing that we know for sure is that the boys always have to pay the price for what they are given. Now in the Bangtan universe, the price that Jin has to pay is none other than the happy memories that he shares with the others, and this is a huge clue, because if Tomorrow by Together will have to pay a similar price, this means that all the memories that they have together will be taken away in exchange for the powers that they were given. This means that the cat might actually take the memory of their friendship as well as the memory of the Star Song, and this is the worst possible scenario, because these are the things that they need in order to stop the Doom's Knight. In the original game, the boys are able to beat the dragon because they sing the song together, so their unity is just as important as the song itself. The Doom's Knight cannot be stopped if the boys forget about them, so even if for now it seems that their prize is to transform into monsters, the fact that in Can't You See Me the boys fight and that as the memories fade into ashes might actually imply that their monstrosity has bigger repercussions. One possible solution that the video foreshadows, however, is actually the concept of true names, which is an idea that exists in many different cultures, traditions and religions, and that is featured in Dungeons & Dragons as well. Now, very simply put, the true name is a concept that revolves around the idea that every single thing or being that ever existed in the universe has a true name that defines their true nature. This is not the same name that we were given at birth, but rather a name that is in a sacred language that most beings cannot actually speak. And this name is essentially connected to our essence and truly defines who we are on a metaphysical level. Now, because of the powerful significance that this name actually holds, it is believed that if you know somebody's true name, you also have control over them, and a good real-life example of this might actually be found in Rumpelstiltskin, which is a fairy tale about a trickster that is eventually defeated when the protagonist discovers his true name. Now, in Dungeons & Dragons, the true name is described as a unique identifier that defines a creature or thing in the cosmos. This is a name that is in the original language of the universe that everybody but the gods actually forgot how to speak. And much like in real-life traditions, D&D tells us that even if most individuals don't know their name, anybody who knows somebody's true name gains power over them. Now in the video we see that even before getting their powers, Yunin Kai is already haunted by an entity that is trying to corrupt his goodness by encouraging him not to care about creatures who suffer. In the video, the entity tells him that there are many names that fade away without ever being called, so right off the bat, this tells us that the true names will be a major aspect of the story. Since for now we don't know if the entity is yet another incarnation of the cat or something else entirely, however, up to this point we can only guess what's all of this about. But by the looks of it, it really seems that evil is actually going after Kai for the goodness that defines his nature. This may or may not be connected to his true name, but one thing that the video is showing us here is that the boys' true names might actually be connected to the characters that they have in the game. Now, if you remember back in the VR version of Minisode 1, the boys actually had different names that were associated to their game characters, and in Yunin Kai's case, his name was also connected to small animals. This might imply that the boys' game characters actually foreshadow their true nature and therefore their true names, and this is important because in the story it is hinted that in order to save themselves, the boys have to remember their name. Back in Magic Island, for instance, the boys are taken over by the curse of the cat and the world descends into chaos, but right at the end the narration tells us that a voice said, "Remember my name." Back in Eternally, on the other hand, chaos once again breaks loose and on the mirror a message appears that says, "Remember my name." Now, since in the video we also see other messages that imply that the boys themselves might be the ones writing them on the other side of the mirror, my guess is that in order to break the curse of the cat, the boys have to remember their true name because that's the only way to regain power over themselves. As we see in the video, when the boys call to the cat essentially puts Yeonjun in his control. It's like he puts him on a leash, if you will, and the same destiny is shared by the others as well. If the boys manage to remember their true name, however, this curse should be broken because knowing your true name gives you control over yourself. Since the dragon is a creation of their mind and therefore a part of themselves, moreover, if the boys remember their true name, chances are that they will not only be able to break the curse, but also to take control of the dragon. And this would actually explain why in Can't We Just Leave the Monster Alive, the boys ride the dragon instead of killing it. You see, remembering the name implies control. It means that the boys can regain power over the story that they created and save the tomorrow that they want to build together. But in order to save the future, the boys have to reconnect with the past, and this is why their game characters are so important. Now in the VR version of Minisode 1, the boys' game personas were associated to 2 classes that can be played in Dungeons & Dragons, and sure enough, these classes tell us quite a lot about the characters and the story itself. Yeonjun, for instance, was a knight and a paladin, and these 2 classes are actually very similar to one another. If the knight is a warrior that pledges his allegiance to rulers, religious orders, and noble causes, the paladin is a holy knight that swears an oath to one of the gods in the game. This is an oath that the paladin can never break, and his power largely depends on what type of god the player is serving. And even if we don't know which god Yeonjun is serving as a child, in Dungeons & Dragons there are a couple that seems to be very fitting. Now, to be honest with you, my very first choice was actually the Oath of the Crown, because this is an oath that is sworn by a paladin that is also a knight that actually protects people from chaotic powers. After I saw Yeonjun's card from the Magic Island book, however, I think that a more fitting oath would actually be the Oath of the Mystic Fire. And this is an oath where a paladin becomes a knight that actually swears allegiance to Mystra, who is the mother of all magic, that is fittingly represented as a blue and white star that can also appear in the shape of a girl. Now, I don't know about you, but to me Mystra looks very much like the star in the story, and if this is the case and Yeonjun swore to her, this means that he has powers that come from a god. These divine powers are usually used to find lost magic, to protect magic, but also to defend the innocent, and once again this would make sense, because when the boys are attacked by the 2 dark figures, Yeonjun steps in to protect Yuninkai without hesitation. Like the paladin, Yeonjun is brave, loyal and protective. He puts himself in danger to protect others, and he does so because that's in his nature. So when he unleashes his power, the blast takes on the shape of a unicorn. Now the unicorn here is actually a very fitting creature for Yeonjun, not only because in D&D the horn of the unicorn is the source of its power, but also because the unicorn itself is a celestial creature that is considered a divine guardian. As we see in the flashback, Yeonjun already had a unicorn familiar as a kid, but back then this animal was a hybrid that kinda looked like a feline with a horn and 5 tails. Now, since I couldn't find anything like it in D&D, my guess is that the creature is an amalgamation between a puma, a kitsune, and a unicorn, but as a grown-up, his power takes on the shape of a full-blown unicorn, which essentially implies that Yeonjun's protective powers are in full effect. As the narration tells us, however, his power is not enough to defeat their enemies, and this leads the boys to call to a greater power that actually comes at a greater cost. As we see in the video, the Odette cat appears out of nowhere in the form of a shadow that surrounds Yeonjun, and its intervention allows him to channel his power and save his friends. Now in theory, this should be a good thing, because in this occasion the cat basically saved their life, but even if at the time Yeonjun thought that this was salvation, the price that they have to pay is very high, because as I said before, this pact essentially binds them to the cat. As we see in a scene that heavily parallels Taeyeon's vision in Eternally and Yeonjun's attack in Napova Star, the cat traps Yeonjun in its grasp and transforms him into a monster, and even if we don't see the other characters transforming, the fact that the cat goes for Taeyeon right after implies that he will suffer the very same fate. As Magic Island showed us, all of them are overcome by the cat. They all pay the price, and at some point all of them will be overpowered by their monstrous side, but in Yeonjun's case I think that it's even worse, because he is a paladin that essentially broke an oath in order to swear another. Now in D&D this is very bad, because as I said before, a paladin can never break an oath, and this is because the oath is sacred and it's what defines them as a person. If they do, however, the paladin can actually become an oath breaker, and this is a type of paladin that is consumed by darkness until the light that they have inside is destroyed forever. This is obviously a terrible destiny for a paladin, and I think that Napova Star might actually foreshadow that something like this will eventually happen to Yeonjun as well. And this would also explain why in Eternity, Yeonjun is branded as the guilty one, even if in reality he just wanted to help. Next up we have Subin, who is a character that in the game plays as a ranger and as an archer. Now in comparison to the other members, Subin's classes are more focused on physical strength, because if an archer is a master in range combat, a ranger is an hunter of the wilderness that is also considered as a guide or a leader for those who get lost in the woods. A ranger can be a great tracker, they have the ability to tame wild animals, and they are usually known for slaying monsters that threaten civilization. And right off the bat, this is very telling, because if as a child we saw Subin riding his animal companion, in the last scene we also see him slaying the dragon to save his friends, both of which are choices that are actually very fitting for both the archer and the ranger. Now, since these classes are not usually known for their magic, the fact that Subin has magical powers makes me think that he might actually belong to a specific order that actually provides supernatural abilities to the player. When it comes to the ranger, for instance, a very fitting order would actually be the Order of the Shooting Star. And this is because the rangers that belong to this group are not only associated to the paladins of the mystic fire, but much like them, they also worship the goddess Mystra as well. This would explain Subin's connection to the Eternity Girl and the magical abilities that he has in the video, but another possible explanation for his magic might actually be found in Subin's appearance, because in his flashback, Subin is the only child that in the game is not fully human. He has pointed ears, and this is a physical attribute that is usually associated to elves, and this would make sense because in the game both the ranger and the archer are classes that are often combined with a character that is an elf or a half-elf. Now, if this is the case, this would mean that Subin is actually an arcane archer, which is the only archer that actually uses magic to improve his skills. But the real reason why I think that game Subin might actually be an elf is because of his visions. You see, in D&D, an elf is a creature that doesn't need to sleep, but when they do, they actually go on a prophetic trance that allows them to access their memories and gather information from them. Now, this is very telling, because in the Doom's Night, Subin not only remembers the past, but he also sees memories of the future, and even if in Magic Island and Eternally he thinks that these are nightmares, now we know that what he sees is actually true. Because of this ability, Subin essentially can access all the information that he needs in order to save everybody from the Doom's Night, but as I mentioned before, at this point I don't think that he realizes this just yet, which is something that will possibly change in the near future. Next up we have Bomgyu, who plays as a druid and as a mentalist. Now, even if in the video we don't see much about Bomgyu's character, his classes actually tell us quite a lot in relation to what we saw in some of their past videos. The druid, for instance, is a class that is connected to nature magic and is able to shapeshift into animals at will. Now, in comparison to Subin's ranger, for instance, who is a class that is usually aligned to good, the druid has a neutral alignment, and this is because their goal is actually to protect the natural balance of things. Now, because of this alignment, the druids are considered as the embodiment of nature itself, and this means that this is a class that can be very gentle and kind, but also very wild and furious. Just like nature has a gentler side and a more violent one, the druid essentially reflects this duality in the player themselves, and in the context of the storyline this might actually be a problem, because as we saw in the past, Bomgyu can be very lovable and friendly, but also a character full of rage that is impossible to control. Now, with the involvement of the cat, this shift might actually be even more evident, because if the monster is awakened, this means that Bomgyu might follow the more violent side of nature and leave behind the more gentle one. But as it turns out, Bomgyu might also have an important role in the story that is actually connected to finding the star. You see, even if in the game the druid is basically considered as an extension of nature itself, each player usually chooses a specific aspect of nature that they worship and from which they gather their powers. Now, in Dungeons & Dragons, a very popular order for druids is actually the Circle of the Stars, and this is an order where a druid takes power from the starlight and actually studies the stars in order to record their secrets. What's interesting about this is that the druids that belong to this circle are actually known for drawing maps of the stars, and this is very important because in the story the boys are literally the star seekers. Back in the fan life, for instance, the boys already used the map of the star in order to find the star that is Moa, and if that was a hint for them being the star seekers, this could imply that in the story Bomgyu will be the one to draw the map. As I mentioned earlier, however, the druid is a class with a strong duality, and this duality is even stronger in the mentalist, who is a class that is considered as a trickster who uses their mind to control other people. Now, as we see in the video, Baby Bomgyu already used this power in the game, because if you look closely, his companion is not an animal like the others, but rather a golem, which is a mindless creature that is controlled by its creator. This is a power that can be used for good and evil depending on the situation, but one thing that is important to keep in mind is that the Mentalist has abilities that can affect other beings on a very large scale. The Mentalists can create illusions, they can lower a creature's will, and they can even access somebody else's unconscious with their mind. So if on the one hand this power can be used to gather information or even control dangerous enemies, on the other it can also be used at the expense of those that surround them. Next up we have Taion, who plays as a sorcerer and an adventurer. Now, in contrast to all the classes that we've seen so far, the sorcerer is actually the only class where the player is born with magic powers, and this makes them very rare and very powerful. This is a class where their magic usually grows from experience and discovery, so as we see in the story, the sorcerer is often associated to the adventurer, who is a class that is known for going on dangerous missions and retrieve important treasures. This is a class that can actually explain why Taion is always connected to clues and investigations. Since he is an adventurer, he is the only one with the skill, the intelligence and the bravery to look for the clues that he needs in order to fix their problems. But another possible reason why Taion is so invested in knowing the truth is because that's the only way that he can truly understand his powers. You see, even if the sorcerer is a class that is born magical, his powers largely depend on their origin, but at this point it's very difficult to know what Taion might be able to do, and I think that he might actually not remember it either. My guess, however, is that the origins of Taion's power might actually be connected to the star. And if this is the case, then this means that he could be an astral sorcerer, which is a mage that can change its appearance at will and has powers that come from the sun, the moon and the stars. This would explain why his game name is Spirit of the Moonlight, but the cool thing about this type of mage is that they actually have the power of astral projection, which would also justify all the visions that Taion is having in the story. Much like what we see in the video, the astral sorcerer is also associated to a book that has all the information about the constellations, and when it becomes powerful enough, it can even create its own star. So even if for now we don't know much about Taion, this is the closest guess that I could possibly find. Last but not least, we finally get to Yunin Kai, who plays both as a mystic and as a bard. Now, as we'll see in a second, Yunin Kai might actually be the real MVP of the story, and this is because his powers are absolutely insane. The Mystic, for instance, is a mysterious and rare class that is essentially an amalgamation of different classes put together. Like Hyunjun's Paladin, for instance, the Mystic has the potential to be a great fighter. Like Subin's Ranger, he can isolate himself and survive on their own. Like Taion's Sorcerer, he can access powerful magic, and like Pumpkyu's Mentalist, he is a master of the mind. The Mystics here can be a psychic, they have telekinesis, they can use telepathy, they can resist mind control, and if this wasn't enough, they can even control the physical world and bend it to their will. Now, all these abilities might actually explain why evil wants to take him so badly and why Yunin Kai is actually able to resist it, but another reason why Yunin Kai is so important here might actually be connected to the Star Song itself. You see, in the game, Yunin Kai also plays as a bard, and the bard is a class that is capable of both magic and combat that actually uses music in order to create magic. Now, this is very important in the context of the game, because his power might actually be the one that the boys need in order to activate the Star Song and save the world. And if this is the case, this would make him a great target for evil, because without Yunin Kai, chances are that the Star Song might not exist to begin with. Even if all the boys are incredibly powerful, Yunin Kai's bard is the only one that can use music to create magic, so if Yunin Kai is out, the others don't stand a chance. As we see in the children's game, the boys have to get together and protect him whatever it takes, and even if I'm sure that at the end the boys will succeed, as of right now the star is still asleep, their names are still hidden, and the cat is still winning, so to know how things will play out, we'll have to wait and see. In the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please think about liking and subscribing. As always, thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.